Governor, you led the 9/11 Commission, and right now in Washington, legislation has been introduced to establish a commission to study this pandemic modeled on the 9/11 Commission. I'd like to ask you to give us your thoughts on whether a national study is a good idea.
I think it is a good idea, and I commend Senator Menendez, among others, for introducing it. But you got to be very careful. It's got to be totally nonpartisan. It's got to be structured with subpoena power so you can get what you need. And perhaps most importantly, the job of the commission is not going to be to find fault. The job of the commission should be to make corrections, find out what we did wrong this time so we can correct them in the future. Now, this will happen again. Mr. Fauci has told us that it's either going to happen maybe 10 years, maybe 5 years, maybe 50 years, but it's going to happen again. And we got to be better prepared. And a commission's work, something like the 9/11 Commission, we made 41 recommendations, most of which were adopted. We're much safer as a country because of it. If they make a similar kind of recommendations based on the facts, we will be a much safer and more prepared country when the pandemic strikes again.
What does and how does a study of this magnitude, how does it get off the ground? What's the process? How does it get started?
Well, it gets started, of course, with the legislation. And the legislation has got to be structured so that every mechanism is put in to make sure it's nonpartisan. This can't be a Republican or Democratic commission. It's got to be a commission for the American people. So you've got to structure it so appointments are made of people who have records of bipartisanship, records of talking to both sides, people who can get along with each other. That's very, very, very important. And I worry about that, whether Mr. Schumer and Mr. McConnell, for instance, if they're two of the appointing people, can make really appointments of people who are going to be fair and nonpartisan and talk to each other and come out with the best recommendations for the American people, not recommendations that try to favor the Republicans or favor the Democrats in some way or other.
So you're saying the members of this commission must be scrutinized, they must be bipartisan. It's very important that the choices of those people, but at the same time, what about involving the various branches of government? How does that process work to get cooperation, to get trust, to bring them into the process of this full examination, which would be undertaken?
We've got to have the full support of the administration. We didn't have to subpoena. We got a lot of good work from the Bush administration. One exception, everybody we called came, testified as honestly as they could. Every document was made available to me. We had millions of documents in our files on the 9/11 Commission study. Everything that went on 9/11, we had access to. Similarly, every decision that was made affecting COVID, all the facts, those have got to be made public, and those have got to be part of the commission study. And if something's classified for one minister, so be it. But the commission members have got to see it. And they've got to know all the facts so they can tell the story all the way through. And from that story, make recommendations that this kind of unpreparedness never, ever happens again in this country.
How do you bring the American people into the process? Those who have suffered from this virus, have lost loved ones, for example, who just don't trust the government's response as it is right now. Are they the people, the American people, who will drive this? And how do you bring them into the process? Your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, we brought the families of 9/11 in, which was similar. And they were very emotional, of course, about it. They lost people they loved. But they also, in a sense, were the wind in our sails. Every time we were blocked by Congress or stonewalled by the president, those families picketed. They sat in offices. They picketed outside the White House gates. They were the wind in our sails, and they helped us all the way through. If you get the right commission, public people, particularly maybe people who have lost members of their family, are going to want to know what happened and how it can be prevented in the future. And they can be very, very important, but it's got to be the commission itself got to establish that confidence. I mean, and you've got to get rid of this partisanship. You can't have the kind of anger that's against both sides in the country now on that commission. So look, what I did as chairman of the 9/11 Commission, When I got appointed, I made sure that no members of the commission sat next to each other as Republicans or Democrats. A Republican that sit next to a Democrat, Democrat sit next to a Republican. We had evening meetings where we just got to know each other really, so we trusted each other. We went to each other's families' homes to really get to know each other. We had, when we were asked to appear on television or on radio, I asked commission members to take somebody from the other party with them. So like Noah's Ark, we went 2 by 2, always. And we get to know each other very, very well. So you've got to do those kind of things to ensure nonpartisanship doesn't just happen. You got to work at it. We got to make sure that the people who are appointed that, particularly the chairman and the vice chairman, those people, a Republican and a Democrat, have got to work together and have got to be totally beyond the kind of partisan rhetoric which we hear too much of today.
Is it the American people then who will demand this transparency? Where does that begin, the transparency of a study like this, so that the people are satisfied?
Well, look, I hope the people who are going to be appointed to the commission are going to want to make a report which is going to stand in history, which is going to really make a contribution to this country and make sure that in the future, any pandemic is handled with the greatest skill, with knowledge of what's gone before. If they really feel that way, then the commission is going to be impelled or propelled to do it right. And I trust, I like people who served in government. You shouldn't appoint anybody who's there now, and certainly nobody ever is going to thinking of running for election to anything again. Lee Hamilton used to call us all a bunch of has-beens because we'd all held important positions in the past. But because none of us wanted to run for anything in the future, we didn't have that ambition. We didn't have that partisan pull. We didn't have that feeling we had to get ourselves out there in front of the camera. And so you got to appoint people who have had a record of working with the other party.
It's important to communicate what you're doing, of course, and that involves the press corps, Governor. How do you establish credibility with the press, and how important is that in an undertaking like this?
Press credibility is very, very important. And in fact, you establish it by doing your job, by being totally open, by answering people's questions as honestly as you can. If something's wrong, say it's wrong and go on, correct it. And you gain that kind of credibility over time. By the time we got into our main public hearings, we'd established that credibility so that the press was really very helpful. When we got denied the kind of time we needed to complete the report by the Congress, the press not only editorialized it, but front page articles that this would cripple the report and how bad it was going to be. And the Congress buckled and they gave us the time we needed. When the president stonewalled and he didn't want to get us access to private briefings, we didn't get us access to interviews with the president and the vice president, the press really came down hard in every branch. And sooner enough, we got what we needed to do the kind of report that we got that still stands up very well. So you've got to have that kind of credibility, but you get that by doing the job right. And when the press sees that you're doing the job right and understands they have access to everything you're doing, they'll help.
What's the time frame for something like this to get underway? Of course, right now we're still in the middle of this virus. There are concerns that a second wave is about to happen. What kind of a time frame for something like this could we expect?
When we get it behind us. You shouldn't try to do a commission like this in the middle of the battle, because you're going to examine the battle and what you did right or wrong, so you can't do it in the middle. You got to wait until we emerge, maybe 6 months from now, maybe a year from now, maybe a year and a half from now, who knows? But when it's over, that's the time to look back. Because then you can look back fairly, and you'll look back at the whole situation and the whole problem, and really try to find solutions, again, to make sure it never, ever, ever happens again.
So you agree, a crisis of this magnitude for the American people deserves a study of great magnitude to answer the questions of what could lie ahead in the future for us?
Yeah, we will never understand what we've done wrong until we study what we did in this particular occasion. When you look at what we did from the moment we found out when the pandemic was approaching, every single step we took. And the process, I think we should also look at other countries because some of them did things right. Let's find out what they did right. Maybe it's stuff we should have done right also. So, this is an immense study. That's why it's got to have the budget, it's got to have the time, and it's got to have the power, the subpoena power, and it's got to hopefully have the full support of the American people.
Well, Governor Kean, having served in such an important position as chairman of the 9/11 Commission, you certainly have given us a great perspective. Thank you very much for a very interesting and enlightening conversation. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken.
Funding for Governor's Perspectives with Kent Manahan has been provided by New Jersey Manufacturers Insurance Group, Seton Hall University, and Seton Hall School of Law.